Well, welcome everybody to a panel of some of the most prestigious, I would say, British commentators and one Scottish commentator. I'll be sure to differentiate between the two as not to embarrass myself further. And here to talk about what exactly is going on in the wonderful land known as Turf Island. And I figured, what could I do as the only person who is more embarrassing than a British person, that being a Canadian, to talk about this would be to get the great minds of all of you wonderful people on the other side of the water to explain to us, the people over here in the North of America, what is going on. Because from an outsider perspective, my best description could be dumpster fire. But maybe you have better insights.
Absolutely fucked.
Yeah, that's probably is that the correct term? Is that the British term for what is going on?
Yes.
Absolutely fucked. Okay.
Well,
could you explain, I guess, for the simplest terms, just to people who have no idea what a prime minister is, what sausage fingers means, what a waffle is, what taking the piss is? Could you explain it, just to be reductionist, if you will?
Who do you want to jump in?
Yeah, to whom are you asking this question? We
okay,
queue
Kevin,
in
you
Britain.
seem like you're ready.
Well, I was going to make a point to, as you're a Canadian, I think the easiest way of understanding this is, your prime minister is occasionally brown on Halloween. We've got one who's like permanently actually brown. Like that's
okay.
You know what I mean?
That's the difference.
Yeah, that's the main difference right now. We've got one that doesn't pretend to be for entirely racist.
Yeah, ours is a racist make believe. That's our prime minister. So there is that.
Everything's fucked. We've had 3 prime ministers in 3 months, and they're all shit.
Yeah, they're not all exactly the same type of shit, but they're like a new sort of brand of shit every time. And you're like, wow, at least it can't be as bad as the last one, because everything's totally different. But then it's actually kind of all just the same, but they're just as bad. I think the general overview is we had like culture wars supreme, like the British Trump, in a very British way, and then we switched over to like Margaret Thatcher 2, who was like, right, we're not going to do culture wars, we're just going to attack poor people. And then that went all wrong, and now they've got like a rebrand of the culture wars guy, but he's like stupidly rich. I think that's the gist.
Yeah.
Is it true?
We've had a lot of records broken as well. We've had a lot of record breaking. So Boris Johnson got in trouble because he promoted a guy called Chris Pincher, who was, it turned out, was engaged in sexual impropriety that Boris knew about. So I don't know. That's kind of amazing. That's like the worst scandal since the resignation of Lord Titty Twister of Arsbury in 1783. And he had like 50 resignations in one day, which I think was record breaking. And then like Liz Truss was the shortest lasting prime minister, but she resigned after 45 days. Second to a guy who had a stroke in office.
True.
And what is this I hear of a head of lettuce? Perhaps beating her.
So one of our newspapers, one of the tabloids, but I guess slightly less fascist right-wing than the others.
I was about to say, can it really be considered a newspaper when it's mainly just tits and the occasional pussy?
Yeah, but that's like in the top half of British newspapers then.
I guess, yeah.
I guess.
You're saying women are not news, Kevin?
Women are old news. That's what I'm saying.
That's what I thought. Okay.
So wait, are you saying
well, but anyway, so we had this newspaper.
Just nudie mags? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Several British newspapers are like that.
Okay.
But and one of them was like, well, who's going to last longer, Liz Truss or a lettuce? And then they did a live stream of a lettuce just slowly rotting over time.
Can I just... There was a story even before that, because this was based on a thing that went viral, of comparing Liz Truss's longevity in terms of her having control over the government, actual control, not just being in office. And they said that without the 2 weeks that the Queen had, died and we were all in national mourning, very sad, obviously, she was in charge for about 7 days. She had actual control over the reins of power, which was about the shelf life of a lettuce, which went sort of viral. And so this paper put literally a live stream for an entire week of a lettuce and Liz Truss. And I thought to myself, well, it's going to be a bit embarrassing when she's there in like 2 weeks and the lettuce is brown. What's going to happen there? It's going to have rotted. And she literally didn't outlast the fucking lettuce. The lettuce won.
But significantly. It had only started to brown at the edges.
Exactly. That would have made...
Like, the core was still good.
An absolutely passable rocket salad out of that, I'm just saying. Yeah.
And they were like...
They've got loads of British things around the lettuce as well. They put like Union Jacks around her, and they got a crown on its head. They got like a Keep Calm and Carry On mug, a Greg's.
Some Marmite.
True.
Yeah,
Okay, so
it was
here
good
might
stuff.
be a
And then
question
they
for
had
you,
a dance party at the end.
LonerBox. I wanted to direct this at you first, and then I'll expand it onward because I know you do a bit of coverage of the alt right and right wingers in Britain. Do you think that when it comes to Sunak, is there at the very least
Excuse me, it's Rashid Sunak, please.
Oh, sorry, Rashid Sunak. Is there
Brandon
a
told us,
small
okay?
percentage? Is there a small percentage of people within the Tories who happen to be what's the polite term, racist, who may be offended by someone not being quite British enough to lead Britain?
Yeah, the Tories are smart though, in that like it seems to be the most racist people in terms of legislation that they put into power are like people of color. Like their immigration was handled by Priti Patel for a really long time, and that's where they decided to deport people to Rwanda if they were asylum seekers, which was like against every fucking rule on earth. And then now she's given the Home Office to Suella Braverman, who's also a POC, and I think she's the one who dog whistles all the time about cultural Marxism and other like mad shit. So she's kind of like their Marjorie Taylor Greene.
But it's the.
She said
I don't know.
her dream was be to see on the front page of the Telegraph a plane taking off to Rwanda full of
Yeah, it was
immigrants.
her-
That was
yeah.
like I have a dream
What?
speech version.
It was like Martin Luther King, but the opposite of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, that's a perfect example of integration working so well in Britain. We've got multiculturalism down to a T. Even our brown people can integrate into our innate sense of racism. It's perfect. Our brown people are the most racist. So,
Speaking of the most racist, Kevin, I wanted to ask you, how is
well, thank you for that segue. What's that about? what's this about?
Talking of racist, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I was actually referencing Sargon of Akkad because I know you've had a few tussles with Carl Benjamin.
Yeah.
And I was curious, how is Carl taking this whole thing, being a ex-leader of UKIP and all that? Well, sorry, member of UKIP.
I'm sure he's getting ready for the race war or something. I imagine, probably. I don't know about him specifically, but I know a lot of people have started this. Well, not a lot, but some people have started a kind of British birtherism movement about Rishi Sunak, which is very funny because we know for a fact he was born in England. And secondly, you don't have to have been born in Britain at all to be Prime Minister, so it doesn't even make any fucking sense. Like Boris Johnson was born in New York, and no one seemed to give a fuck about that. So a lot of racism, which is honestly the only good thing about him being Prime Minister is the fact that he's brown and that annoys racists. That's literally it. He's garbage otherwise.
And there's no other saving grace.
It is worth emphasizing that he's very far right wing. Like his culture war, ridiculous, but he's also like pro austerity. He's nearly a billionaire. Doesn't seem to have any connection with any real people problems at all in any way. He went really hard attacking trans people in the first leadership campaign that happened this year. He's garbage person all round.
And on that point, and I think Katy might want to talk about this, I suppose. Kemi Badenoch, who's another person of colour who they've put forward because she's very, very bigoted. She is the extreme TERF who has now been made the Minister for Women and Equalities. And literally the first thing she did in Parliament today was lie and say that another member of Parliament had successfully sued Pink News, an LGBT news organisation, when that was a lie.
I'll just be really lame and say TERF in like a general sense, people know it just means like transphobic. She's not even arguably on the like radical feminist side of TERF, gender critical, whatever. She is just hardline anti-feminist. She voted, her most recent vote, or one of her most recent votes, was against buffer zones for abortion clinics. So that's where you would ban people from protesting as, women and trans people go into abortion clinics. But she's voted against gay marriage. She's voted against other women's rights. Like her whole career is the best way to describe her, like political career, is anti-women inequalities. And now she's in charge of women inequalities, and it's kind of terrifying to be honest, because she really fucking hates trans people, and she's probably gonna roll out some bullshit in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
When you said that culture wars have been like a centerpiece, especially for Sunak, is that like? Are they doing the same thing that politicians in America are doing, like weaponizing, teaching about systemic racism in schools, or teaching about gender theory in classrooms? Is that similar to the political landscape in Britain?
Well, I just think that we've never even attempted to teach about racism in schools, so it hasn't seemed to have got onto their agenda so much.
Well, I would point people to the fantastic content of a certain Mr. LonerBox, who did a fantastic video about, I forget the woman's name now, who does the racism seminars, and how when she came to Britain, it didn't work at all because.
Jane Elliott.
Yeah, Jane Elliott. Yeah, it didn't work at all because the people of Britain are just like, no, we're not racist, and it doesn't matter how racist they are, they will just say we're not racist, and that's enough. Brilliant. Just pretend, basically,
Yeah, but I think the cultural war things here have been about immigration in a different way. It's usually, well, it was about Brexit. Brexit was our big thing, and then they just try and make it about, we've got border crossings by boat, so people come over from France on small boats, and that's one of the things. They're 12 million people are arriving on the shores of Dover every single day. They're going to replace us, that kind of stuff. And also about travelers. Maybe it's not such a headline grabbing thing as trans people and immigrants are, but they've definitely culture warred them and tried to basically wipe them out. So I think they're the British press's favourite culture war items.
Well,
you guys don't know about the Conservative leader. Do you know Douglas Ross, the leader of the Conservatives in Scotland?
Yeah.
He was asked once, if you had all the power, what would your first act be? And he said, "Oh, it would be tougher measures on travellers."
Really?
That would be his one service to humanity. The first thing.
God. Oh.
It's really bleak. They passed I don't know loads about it, but they passed some bill last year, I think, where they basically just outlawed being a traveller in England.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty bleak.
I think it used to still be acceptable in Scotland up until not that long ago, when it was okay for a pub outside their front doors to just say no travellers allowed.
Yeah, but basically it's perfectly fine to be racist against Roma people. Yeah, 100%. It's just that they're one of the few that you can still do that with. But as to the culture war thing, I think the point that you were trying to get at is, and I think Britain is the perfect example of this. The absolute Tory economic model that they want to introduce, Liz Truss tried to do, and it failed completely. It's a miserable. It's the most unpopular, shitty, unworkable economic situation imaginable. So, in order to get around the fact that no one wants it, they're going to scare people with immigrant this, trans people that, blah blah blah. It's the typical bait and switch, distraction maneuver.
But was Brexit not a success?
Brexit has been one of the most enormous fuck-ups ever. We shot ourselves in the legs and then cut off our feet, and we're now about to die or something, basically.
I mean, in a way, it has been a success, because the main reason to vote for Brexit was because you didn't like foreign people, and now everyone's like, oh, why would I go to England? So, in a sense,
you say that, but we're going to have fewer Polish people coming over. But we know for a fact that the free trade deal that India want to do involves tens of thousands of more student visas for Indians. So the racists are actually just going to get more foreign people that they can instantly tell are foreign people, rather than the white people from Poland. So they're not going to be happy either. No one's going to be happy in this situation. So
and that's kind of the situation the Conservatives manoeuvred themselves into by having Brexit as a thing at all, because they knew it wasn't going to work. They knew that. They know even for right-wing policies, you need to ship in loads of people who will work certain jobs for low wages and stuff. That's a core component of their entire economic model. And then they knew it would make that harder. So they, if you block off immigration from Europe, then you just have to get it from somewhere else. And they all knew that, and they've all been trying to play both sides. And it's they're always just oh, it's the problem for the next person. It's a problem for the next person. But it's always their problem.
Is it possible for you to do a reverse Brexit and rejoin the EU, or is the EU permanently going to be nah, you made your choice?
It's possible to rejoin, but you have to rejoin as a completely fresh member. So the advantages we had, we kept our own currency, didn't join the euro, we didn't have Schengen, which was absolute freedom of movement, which I have no problem with, but lots of racists did.
I'd want that.
But the point is, for the British public's perspective, we'd have to join a very disadvantageous set of positions, so it's not going to happen anytime true. But I think there will be I'm going to call it Brentrance, because we had Brexit, so I think there's going to be a strong Brentrance Brie-entry campaign in the not too distant future, I imagine.
So that mean an independent Scotland's going to do Skentrance?
Yes,
because we voted majority to stay in the EU. So especially by the standards of somewhere like Russia, that means the EU can come and invade us and take us back. Many people are saying this.
True.
You could have a same.
We need
Many
a
people.
Scottish special military operation forthwith. That's what we have to do.
Yeah,
So
but I did. So go on.
well, what I'm hearing from all of you is that everything is fucked, and that this is not getting better. But then
No,
there's something on
not
the
true.
horizon.
Everything's perfect. We're a very normal country. Please just don't look under the covers. Don't look behind the curtain. It's all fine. That smoke is supposed to be there.
I just think
it's fine.
that meme that's the steamed hams where
Yeah.
and Superintendent Chalmers is like, good God, what's going on in there? And it's just they put the British flag on the door. I just feel like
that was great.
that just totally sums up the situation.
But what about this Keir Starmer I hear so much about? Is he the savior of the Commonwealth?
Oh God, he's not the saviour of anything. He's shit. No offense,
He's very
Keith, if
bland.
you're watching, mate. But I mean, literally, I don't know why the lettuce doesn't just become prime minister. They've got more fucking backbone than either of the two leaders right now. It's embarrassing.
It's kind of impressive that all you need to do as a Labour leader is just to do nothing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let the Tories fuck themselves. Because he's like, 33 points ahead in the polls? Like, yeah.
But he's done nothing.
Even put the Tories down to like double digits, yeah.
Yeah, he's done.
Like that.
He has done nothing. Yeah.
It's like
That's all
that
you need
on
to
Mario
do.
Party.
You need to be as long as you're a mammal with a head, you're fine.
It's like that Mario Party meme. Sorry, another lame meme reference. But where like Luigi stood there on a ball, and then all the other three just go around and fall off the edge, and then it's like Luigi wins. I feel like that's what Keir Starmer's like. But he hasn't just done nothing, because he has said that like his immigration policy is no different to the Conservatives, and he doesn't want big reform, and he doesn't support strikers, and basically every single remotely centrist or left-wing position that anyone might want to take in today's political landscape, he said no to. So he's trying to rebrand as like Tory light.
Yeah,
I think.
Which is
It's
infuriating.
weird that he's done that as well, because like apart from like, he broke like every pledge that he made to get
all
in,
of them. All of them.
The one thing that he did that's really I can't understand that he's doing is that trying to compare his energy policy to Corbyn's. There are some parts of Keir's new energy policy that are apparently more like they might be more left wing than Corbyn's. He wants to make the UK like a green energy, like the first country to go completely green by 2030, like the first developed nation to do so. I'm like, why are you just like breaking everything and then just deciding to go, I'm going to do like the most extreme green policy like any government's ever. I don't know what's going on like inside that brick shaped head, but he's a very it's complex.
True, but it just every
what
time I
would
look.
trigger a vote of no confidence? Does it work the same as the Canadian system because we emulated yours? Is it basically?
Yeah,
I don't know how the Canadian one works, but it's a bit of a mess here.
Yeah, in theory, it would just take a simple majority in Parliament, but the Tories have such a big majority that realistically, that isn't going to happen anytime soon, because the Tories don't want a general election because they'd get absolutely wiped out. So they're just going to cling on like grim death to the end of this Parliament, which would be the end of 2024, and hope that, I don't know, Keir Starmer comes out having kicked a puppy to death or something. I don't know. I don't know what he'd have to do to lose a 30-point lead, but that's what they're hoping for, I guess.
Yeah, I guess this is what I'm worried about, is that they all must know. I mean, there can't be many Tories right now who think, oh, we can win the next general election. So they must be planning for that. And having them install Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch is terrifying, because both of those two are absolutely mad and like genuinely evil people. And they're like, one of my friends earlier was describing them as true believers of their cause. Like, Kemi Badenoch truly believes in removing human rights. And same with Dominic Raab. He's another one who's absolutely terrible. And he's like, his pet project is pulling us out of the European Court of Human Rights, which is like the thing that all of our rights rest on, and is different from the EU. Yeah. And he's like a true believer for that. So they know they're not getting back in power in 2 years' time. So they know they've just got this time limit, 2 years, do as much damage to human rights as possible. And that's going to be what they're going to try and do.
Well, to be fair, it's even pre-Brexit. They've always wanted to remove us from the Human Rights Act, because occasionally, because our immigration policy is so inhumane, much like Australia's now, I guess, that it falls foul of international human rights law, and the European Court of Human Rights steps in and says, no, you can't just, I don't know, catapult immigrants into the sun or whatever the fuck you were planning to do, and that annoys Tories, and Tories come out and it's the big issue of the day. The human right, these European unelected blah 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 judges are stopping us from oppressing brown people, and so they've been wanting to do that for years now.
Yeah, a long time. But I think that talk, because they often pick like some terrorist who they want to deport, and then they can't deport them because they'll get tortured when they get deported there, or something like that. And that's their way of selling it. And all of the newspapers are like, Europe's preventing us from getting rid of terrorists or something. But I feel like that's their kind of culture war issue to get it over the line. And the European Court of Human Rights guarantees us a right to privacy and a right to all of the basic rights that we have.
But why would you want why would you want privacy, Katie? If you've got nothing to hide, why would you need privacy?
Oh yeah, good point.
It's fine.
Well, there you go. Let's just get rid of it.
If you're a proud, loyal, patriotic citizen, you don't need to be any privacy whatsoever. That's a totally normal and not fascistic way of government ministers acting. It's fine.
If you're loyal enough to pay tax in the UK. Oh wait, hang on. So Rishi Sunak's wife,
and this one is written in such a way that I think you'll understand. Is there a single politician working today in England that you do not consider to be a waffling bellend?
I like Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I will say that Lance geographically incorrectly said England, and Nicola Sturgeon is in Scotland. So this is.
Okay.
Did you mean United Kingdom, Lance? Please.
Well, we could parlay that into. Can you tell me about the SNP and when Scotland's going to separate?
Well, we've got a Scottish person, so.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Yeah, the SNP have basically been like enjoying a kind of one-party rule for the last 10 years, so they're very popular. And independents, the polls are kind of shifty on it, but it looks like the next few years there's probably going to be another referendum because it's been nearly 10 years since the last one. So yeah, we're hoping. We'll see.
Cool.
And then was it Skentrance? Yeah, I can't wait for Skentrance. I can't wait to sell that one.
That'll be good. But yeah, in terms of there aren't actually, ironically, any in England really, I don't think. But Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, and I would argue Mark Drakeford, the head of the Welsh Assembly, has been doing some amazing stuff as well.
Yeah, he's good too.
Yeah, but they're devolved powers, so they only have control over certain aspects of what goes on there. And the national government, run by the Tories, are trying to constantly fuck with them. I mean, Liz Truss was in power for 2 months, didn't even have a phone call with either Sturgeon or Drakeford at all.
She said that she was going to ignore them.
Yeah, which is like, I mean, what kind of country is this then if you're just going to refuse to talk to the people that live in other places?
I also like Angela Rayner, who's like, I think she's number 2 in Labour at the moment.
Yeah, right,
she seems like a real person who like cares about stuff and.
Yeah,
it looks good.
Yeah, Zoltana, she's pretty. She's like a young squad kind of person.
Yeah, there's some good, decent backbench people, but like in terms of people who could probably get into government, there's nobody, which is really, really depressing, actually.
Ed Miliband's made a bit of improvement since he tried to be prime minister.
True, but he's got like the stand.
He's one of the.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I think he's one of the reasons that I think part of Corbyn's Labour, like his workers' policy, is still there, which includes like that kind of like French style, like the right to clock out, so that people, your bosses can't call you once you've clocked out, and just like other kind of pro-worker measures like that. I think Ed Miliband's been partly involved in keeping that in for now. Yeah.
Oh, there's Andy Burnham, actually, the mayor of Manchester.
Oh yeah, he's good.
Who was previously.
He's got a good meme as well.
Yeah, he was previously a Labour MP, and actually a Labour minister, wasn't he, under Gordon Brown, who went and became mayor of Manchester. He took the Manchester buses back into public ownership and has generally been a pretty forceful figure. So if he was to rejoin Westminster, he could possibly do something, but who knows? That's future down the line, I think.
Someone emailed me this, and I wanted to ask it to all three of you, and it was something along the lines of, what does Britain produce? And they weren't saying it to be mean or cruel. It was more like, what is the GDP of Britain? What is it based on?
Prime Minister.
Banking.
We just produce
We're a service economy.
Now.
What are you talking about? We produce services.
Okay.
We don't really make anything anymore now.
Produce oil.
Marmite.
Although Scotland produces
oil. We need to drain the oil and then Scotland can leave. Is basically, I think, the plan at this point.
Accents, got a lot of them.
Got a lot of accents.
Wait, but is
got
that true? If Scotland separated, they would take the oil with them, and then
It's in
Britain
the
would be
Scottish
hard way?
Sea.
yeah, it's in Scottish waters. Yeah, so and of course we've got the added complication that our nuclear submarines are based in Scotland.
You're
as
right,
well.
yeah.
And the Scottish government have said they will not have them under any basis. So if they separated, we'd have to, I don't know, just have them just constantly roaming the seas like pirate ships. I don't know, but yeah.
I mean,
We
the
can
Lake
rent them
District.
out, you know.
Yeah. Or we'll just have to Guantanamo small bits of Scotland away or something. I don't know.
Moving on, what's the deal with Russell Brand? Is he an actual legitimate threat to British democracy and or civility in this country? Because he has grown to be one of the, if not the largest YouTuber in the political arena.
I didn't even think he was
know what-
relevant.
Well, I
thought he disappeared after
that's
Jeremy
what I wanted to
Corbyn.
find out. Is he relevant over there? Because over here he makes waves, but I don't know if.
I think, to
over
be
there
fair,
he's seen as.
I think he probably is more popular amongst like Americans and stuff, like fucking crazy Q people. I mean, in Britain, he's not really that much of a figure, to be honest. He's just a kind of quack on the internet.
He
It
was.
must
He
be
had this
Americans,
phase.
right? Like, sorry.
Yeah. No, you go on.
It must be Americans. Like, I think his shows have tanked in the UK because they're supposed to go on for like 2 hours, but I've had people tell me that he keeps it going afterwards for another 3 because he has like meditation sessions after his comedy shows. So, yeah, his shows are getting a bit smaller. I imagine that's probably coming from Americans now, right?
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yeah.
He had this like moment of relevance in mainstream British politics when he was like leading some revolution where he was saying don't vote. I remember him saying like all young people should stay at home and not vote, and then that was like his contribution, and then he said he regretted it afterwards.
And now he's gone all in on this World Economic Forum thing, which is like Rishi Sunak is technically he's in league with. Let's be honest, they're talking about the Jews. He's.
I was going to say he's
yeah.
heading the globalist.
Yeah, he's with George Soros and he's this, that, and the other. I saw someone on Twitter, one of these birther people, going on about him being potentially part of a communist plot to take down Britain.
Well, actually, there's a conspiracy theory that has some legs, which is Liz Truss, like her parents are both super left wing, and she used to be a Liberal Democrat, and everyone's saying maybe she is just like playing the long game and got voted into office to just destroy the Tory party.
Well, not just that, but she was famously, when she was a Lib Dem, she was a anti-monarchist and went in there
and anti-Brexit.
And technically, the Queen died of natural causes. Yeah, well done.
Yeah, straight after
Agent Truss.
Exactly.
Stand at ease. Yeah.
This is
That is the ultimate
theory,
sleeper agent, right? Because she comes off like someone who's like kind of asleep all the time.
True.
I mean, as for Russell Brand, like, remember that story when he said don't vote, then he changed his mind and made a video about how you should vote. It turned out he never registered to vote. People look into that. He never actually registered.
Twat.
We've always seen the signs. Maybe you fucking English people liked him when he was like left wing or whatever at the time, but
No.
now we've always seen the signs.
Well, he's
Fuck that
he's
guy.
such a cheeky little chappy, isn't he? Oh, what a character! Oh, he's
What a
wonderful.
character.
Oh.
There is
feel
one
like
film with him in where it's got a good line where they're like, "You sound like he's from London," and that made me laugh. Sorry.
That is the
Other than
ultimate
that-
millennial joke. Every millennial knows that joke.
You sound like he's from London.
If you're a leftist in the Queen's Dominion right now, what are your hopes? Where do you?
The
place-
Queen's Dominion is like
Queen's?
hell now.
Oh, sorry, the King's.
the King's
I apologize.
It's the
Dominion.
King's Dominion.
Yes, I apologize. Sincerely. He's my king too. Okay.
Yeah.
Where,
You're not-
where
or
do
maybe
you
you
place
just
your
missed your
loyalties?
not respecting the
Like
change.
where do you place your hope? Who's like obviously? I mean, you'd prefer Labour wins over the Tories, of course. I'm sure everyone does. But do you see? Are you hoping that Scotland separates and they join the EU and they become a more left-wing country as a result of separating from Britain? Do you have a politician in mind? Is there another Corbyn coming along who isn't a raging anti-Semite that could possibly?
Please don't leave Scotland. Please don't leave. You've got all the
So-
oil. You've got the only progressives in fucking Parliament. Like, we're fucked.
Nah, you know what, guy? Like, fuck. Like, Scotland's not an oppressed nation, right? The reason Scotland is part of the UK is because we tried to build an empire. We started with Panama, failed, went bankrupt, and got bailed out by England in exchange for joining the Union.
True.
And then, like, But we're not like an oppressed nation. We're just like a slightly irritated nation. Like on the passports, there's the lion and the unicorn has a fucking crown around its neck on a chain leash. And the unicorn Scotland's national like.
Was it? I didn't even notice that.
If you look at the passport, you'll see it's on your blue passport as well. Yeah. You know, we're used as little test monkeys for the poll tax or for the bedroom tax. We actually kind of respect refugee rights here. Like when Home Office vehicles come to deport people, people will come out and stand in the streets to block them. But I don't know. If there is something about leaving you guys behind, because Tories will do a lot better without us. Like because Scotland always kind of fucks the Tory vote.
Like selfishly, I think that like I used to think selfishly, oh, I want Scotland to stay because they balance out the kind of insanity of how right wing and stuck up England is. But I think that we still are just doing that anyway. Like you haven't managed to stop us this time. And now selfishly, especially as a trans person, I kind of hope Scotland goes independent, because if they start rounding us up or whatever, but like in a more realistically, if they start bringing in bathroom bills or bringing in Section 28 Part 2 or something, I you know, if there's a situation, pretty much all my trans friends who I talk to have a line in the sand where it's like, this is where I need to leave the country. And it's not unreasonable that might happen in the next 2 years. And if that happens, it's going to be like Ireland or Netherlands, and they are across the sea, and my parents are old, and like it's going to be harder to travel and all this kind of stuff. And Scotland is the easiest place for me to flee to. Yeah. So that is my currently bleak analysis. I want Scotland to go independent, so when England fashes out, there's some kind of safety.
Well, yeah, I don't want Scotland to leave, just on the basis that we you know, the aforementioned aspects, but I couldn't ask a Scottish person to vote to remain. I don't think that would be an ethical thing for me to do at this point. I think they have every right and every reason and want to go, and they should be given another vote, frankly. But we'll see if that happens.
I mean, I never understood this, because in the last referendum, English voters were always like 70 to 80% wanting Scotland to stay, and I'm like, why? Why do you need us?
Because you're the last bit of the empire we have. We've got like Northern Ireland and Scotland, and that's about it at this point.
Like Northern Ireland too.
Yeah.
Wexit. We could have Wexit.
You have like a million islands in the fucking Indian Ocean, you know, like they're not really that useful, but you can have them.
Falklands.
You've got the Falklands.
Scilly Isles.
The Falklands stands with
Gibraltar.
Okay, you're the last bit of the empire that we have that isn't geostrategically worthless and or a massive international diplomatic mistake. There.
I don't know. Maybe that's the problem. England's focused too much on Scotland, where they should really be like getting the Falklands. Yeah, they've abandoned their Falkland brothers.
Yeah, the penguins and the 6 people who live there. Yeah.
I like the idea that the UK is made up of 4 countries, of varying levels of bullshit. No, that's a good enough reason, isn't it? Just vibes.
Just vibes. That's the perfect summation of the British way of thinking. Just vibes. Yeah. It actually is. Yeah.
That's nice, isn't it?
Yeah. But no one answered my question. There's just no hope left. Like what?
Oh yeah, there's no. There's no fucking hope. No. God. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've taken that as. I've taken that as read.
I think it's almost a blessing that Keir Starmer kind of like. I think there's a little bit. I don't even know if he did this on purpose, but the fact that Keir Starmer is just kind of stuck away from union stuff, I think that's probably the consequence of that. Is that when unions go on strike now, their leaders get to take the camera, and like Eddie Dempsey and Mick Lynch taking the spotlight instead of a Labour politician is actually a really good thing, because they're so much better at it, and they're really popular as well. And I think a lot of what was there with Tony Blair. We have counters to that now. Like we have momentum. We have unions are a lot more popular now than they used to be. So I think culture war wise, I guess maybe we're more left wing than we were in the 90s. So
I think that's undoubtedly true.
So I think it's that whole thing, you know, like politicians are not leaders, and like Keir Starmer is a perfect example of that. Yeah. He'll do whatever the fuck he needs to do to get elected, and if what he needs to do to get elected is to keep all those pesky left-wing activists happy, he'd probably do it. So,
well, but they have been.
I think there's a lot more in place to pressure him than.
Yeah. Well, this is what the point I'd make is that if you're looking for hope for the left, I wouldn't look towards Parliament, frankly. right now, because there realistically isn't anything there. But the aforementioned Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey, who are both trade union leaders here, who are part of this thing called the Enough is Enough campaign, which is like trade unionists and political activist groups around the country trying to essentially end austerity, I guess. That kind of thing, I think, is where we need to focus, because actually the Tory policies aren't popular when you actually explain them to people and you explain how this affects their lives. It's the bullshit from the media and from the political sort of class, if you want to call them that blind people to it. When you get the Enough is Enough campaign and you get forceful, passionate speakers like Mick Lynch out there speaking a language that people understand and really basically getting down to it and connecting with people, you find that actually there's a progressive caucus out there that can have an impact. And that's where we need, I think, to focus for the time being. And then once you see that political capital is there, politicians can't ignore it. And that people like, as you know, LonerBox was saying, Keir Starmer, if he could get into power by promising us absolute socialism, he'd do it. He doesn't care. So force him to do the good things then. Force him to, you know?
Yeah, I think how I always view things, especially when we're talking about culture wars, is generally the public supports like more progressive cultural war stuff, but the British media particularly, and then the political class, are just so garbage. They're just totally disconnected from everything else. And I think if the British media, I mean, I guess all traditional media is slowly dying, but the sooner the British media can die, the better, because it is just the reason for all of that. I just feel like it's the main force in this, because like our media is very different to how it works, at least in the USA. I'm not quite sure how it's like in Canada. But
we just throw maple syrup at a camera for hours. It's awesome. Yeah.
With our like newspapers and news channels and stuff, everyone's worked at every other one. They've all gone to the same schools. They're all like, you know, posh kids. And often you get like, oh, someone who's now working for this like far right Telegraph paper. They used to work for the like centre left Guardian or whatever. And they're all friends with each other. So when they pick an issue, for example, trans rights, it's just wall to wall. All of them agree. There's no shaking up or anything. So when they all decided they didn't like Boris, they did all just go for him, which was a good thing. But up until that moment, they'd all been supporting him. And then as soon as Liz Truss showed up, they all supported her for like 5 minutes, and then they all switched. And the media here is just so garbage, and it is very right-wing. Like, we have... The Guardian is right-wing. I think that's sensible to say.
Well,
it's just fucking trash.
Yeah, the Guardian is seen as a kind of liberal left kind of paper.
It's not.
And yet it's riddled with the most horrific turfism. Like some of the most nasty shit you'll find in the British media. Which gives you a fair indication of how... The Independent isn't too bad, but I mean, it's still... Yeah, they're pretty centre. Like, that's one of the better ones, I guess. But
most of these papers will, like... Sorry.
No, go on.
It's most of these papers will host. Occasionally, they'll have like opinion pieces at the end by the more left-wing characters. But I think even like the Guardian got in trouble with their own New York office because or their own American office because they were posting transphobic shit. And Independent, they're maybe I think I haven't seen as much from them, but they're they'll publish headlines about grooming gangs, but only if it's brown people doing it. So they'll do that whole thing as well. And they're also they're still run by the oligarch, aren't they? By Lebedev.
Yeah. Honestly, we'll look back, I think, at this period in history and realise that Rupert Murdoch was one of the most destructive forces against democracy and human rights. Yeah.
How old is he? Why does he just keep going on forever? I seem to remember people talking about in the 90s how old he was.
Because he's got dirt on the...
long hair.
He has lots of sons.
He's got dirt on the devil.
When he dies.
He's literally got so much dirt on the devil. He's sold his soul, and the devil won't reap it because of the headlines the next day. Trust me.
Is the youth in like England as kind of based as they are in North America? Because I find like as bad as politicians are in Canada and US, it seems more often than not when you look at kids in schools, they're way more pro trans rights, way more pro LGBTQ plus, way more concerned about climate change, the environment, that kind of stuff, social justice, marginalized communities. Is that the case in England as well?
Yeah, if you look at the voting numbers, they're like young people voted for Jeremy Corbyn in massive numbers. Unfortunately, not that many young people voted, so that's ultimately what happened there.
Because of Russell Brand.
Because of Russell Brand, yeah, fuck you, Russell Brand. But also, if you look at things like the well-publicised Just Stop Oil campaign, where they've been throwing like soup at art and stuff, a lot of that's young people getting on the ground and actually doing things. The same with Extinction Rebellion and various other other things like that. They're a more progressive force for the country. It's the boomers that are really holding us back. So if they could, fuck off sometime soon, that'd be cool.
And the problem is as well in the UK is that like the old people are like, we're a very old nation. I think like our average age is like 45. But I think there is this cope that conservatives have in that like when the youth get older, they'll become conservative as well, just like their parents did. But like the reason our parents probably became more right wing when they got older was because they had, not because they grew up, but because they had like property, right? They were able to live a very like middle class kind of conservative lifestyle, and then that's much easier to move into that political like. But when you're young now, you're not going to get a house, like probably not,
No.
or not easily, and you're not really going to have anything to conserve. So
well, exactly,
yeah,
Gen X and Boomers are all fucking landlords and stuff like that. Like they've got skin in the game, so to speak. Whereas all young people, you can't even afford to rent a shoebox in a big city in Britain anymore. Like there's no investment these young people have in the system. So why the fuck would they vote for the continuation of the system? Now, hopefully they turn left rather than right. But either way, I think we're going into some extreme times.
Well, yeah, I think it's going to get worse, like more politically polarized and more extreme. And when sort of economies collapse and stuff, that's when the far right gets in, isn't it? So I just honestly, I don't want to be like all doomer about it, but I think maybe I spend too much time paying attention to trans politics rather than bigger like patterns and stuff. But I just do not think that it's impossible that we could just properly fascist out. Like it really might happen. Might happen where they're just banning trans people from existing.
I think I don't think you need to worry about focusing too much on trans issues, because I think that is really the canary in the coal mine. I think the way in which trans people are being treated is a very good test case for the way in which human rights is being are being undermined in Britain. And again, we're coming to that sort of tipping point of either socialism or barbarism. And people are going to have to make a fucking choice pretty damn soon, because the tipping point's coming.
Yeah.
I think it does show you just how lacking these right-wing parties are in any other kind of vision as well, though, because at least in the 70s they had something to offer that was shit but new, like neoliberalism and the free market and like unleashed and all that shit, a nation of shareholders. Like they were selling something. And even back then under Thatcher, I think she was more popular among the youth than she won the youth vote. Reagan, I think, was more popular among young people than he was among old people. So they don't really have that, which is why they just have to use these like wedge cultural issues and just like rain hellfire upon fucking trans people. That's all they've got.
Part of the reason is that they've hollowed out the societies through neoliberalism. There isn't really anything there for them to sell. They've sold everything. They've sold the kitchen sink. So what in terms of conservatism, other than rebuilding the base of what made these societies, which is very anti-conservative, what can they offer? Just the hollowness of, like in Britain they call it levelling up. The idea that poor people are being made better. It's nonsense. It's fabricated, like it's a facade. It's a Potemkin village. It's absolute garbage. It's guff. And that's all they have is a pretense giving a shit about poor people, and that's about it.
They don't even really pretend anymore. Like, I know the conservative kind of thing has been like, working class. It's similar to what the Republicans are doing. They're like, we're the people of the working class because those liberal elites. But like, now they just had Liz Truss come in and say we're doing tax cuts for the rich, and everyone's going to get poorer. And then they got rid of her, and now they've got a fucking billionaire in charge who's put Jeremy Hunt in, who's gonna bring on more austerity. What more austerity can they do? They've already destroyed the country.
I said it. We're one step away from hunting the poor on horseback. That's how far away we are now. It's that like there's nothing. Yeah, there's no like they've cut it to the bone. There's nothing. There's no state left for them to get rid of without Mad Max appearing or something.
One thing I guess we haven't mentioned yet is the NHS, and that's been to destroy that has been a long-term Conservative goal, hasn't it? And it is on its knees now.
And Jeremy Hunt was the man who did it, when he was health secretary.
And maybe we will see that happen. I mean, that could happen in the next.
Well, you've already seen it. I think you've seen Liz Truss's book, which she co-wrote a few years ago, where she was talking about introducing insurance-based schemes and so on. You've seen Tory backbenchers salivating at the thought. They wanted to do this for ages, and they've been in power long enough that they've cut it so far that it becomes virtually unviable, and the radical alternative that might be able to save it isn't there anymore. It's now going to be Keir Starmer essentially lowering the body of the NHS into its eternal grave.
Katy, could you push back on this for 2 seconds? I have a lot of people who reply to pro-trans posts that I make with the NHS official website saying that, hey, did you know the NHS is actually dropping gender-affirming care and is actually speaking out against it as being harmful to kids? They always reference the NHS. Is there a reason they keep using that as like a source?
Yeah, I mean, the NHS has been garbage for trans people always. Like there are international guidelines for trans healthcare, and countries try and keep up with them or ignore them. And England has generally been behind, particularly England, but the UK has been behind on these guidelines just always. So we have this like centralized model where we just have a couple of gender identity clinics around the country, and rather than doing the normal NHS where you just see a doctor and they refer you to a specialist, or they just give you prescription at the point of contact with your doctor or whatever, we have these, like, you have to travel halfway across the country and join some 7-year waiting list to be seen by someone and all that kind of stuff. So we've already had this culture of treating trans people like trash and not keeping up with the standards. Like, there is some medication that is standard to prescribe in Canada and Australia and the US, which they just refuse to prescribe here, and all this kind of stuff. So it's already garbage. And one of their things was all of the trans kids in the whole country went to just one place in London, and it was disastrously run. It wasn't run by people who care about trans people. The waiting lists were horrific. It was really focused on pushing back against giving anyone healthcare, and so it was a disaster. So they did a review of it and found out that it was just harming people, and so they're going to close it, or it is in the process of closing. And it's a dangerous time because the idea is to close it and replace it with something else. So the first bit of propaganda that you're referring to is they said, oh yeah, we're going to close it and we're going to replace it with, rather than the centralized model, we're going to have lots of different places. So we're going to go from one place for trans kids to we'll start with 3 and then we'll expand out 5, 7 or whatever. But all the newspapers were just like, they're closing the trans identity clinic for children, and they didn't mention the replacement. So that got people on this momentum of, oh, the NHS is closing, the gender identity clinic. And we also had this court case a while ago where a detransitioner took the NHS to court, and the court said, oh, we're banning all trans healthcare for kids, and then that was quickly repealed. But then that was also reported in the news, and the repeal wasn't. So we already had this momentum up, and then, sorry, I'm kind of ranting off here really quickly.
No.
And then they had this review run by a conservative of trans healthcare for trans kids. And it's not complete yet. There's been an interim report, but it's kind of garbage. It's just, written by someone who doesn't care about trans kids and who's spending time listening to hate groups. And so politically, they are opposed to it. And so that they've now just rolled out these new guidelines. It's guidelines for review. I'm not sure what the official term for it is, but basically they've put a draft of these new guidelines out, and they are really garbage, just basically trying to ban trans kids. But the important thing here is this is political. All of this is political, because it's the Conservative government pushing against it. It's the courts pushing against it. It's not the science, and that's the thing. Whenever we focus on trans healthcare, that we should actually be listening to. The World Professional Health Organization of Trans People, WPATH, just released new guidelines, and they are more progressive. In places that actually study trans healthcare, like in the US and stuff, new studies come out all the time which just show that trans healthcare is good for trans kids and trans adults. So yeah, we just have a situation where we've got a really right-wing government in control of the situation, and that's why. And that's part of the gender critical propaganda, which is very British focused, because that's where they get all the influence from. That's where all the thought leaders are. That becomes then internationalized out. So you get gender critical people in Canada who will know all of the UK memes and won't know anything about what's going on in Canada. And so they always talk about the NHS because that's where they've got their propaganda points from. Hopefully that's a summary. Yeah. I can go into more detail.
Yeah, I've noticed that when I argue with that last thing you said. Every time I argue with TERFs now, they always want to talk about a country that they're not from. I think this probably because they're used to, say if you're an American transphobe, you're probably used to arguing with other Americans by just talking about the UK because they don't know the pushback to that particular point. But yeah,
Also,
that
But it's
happens quite a
because
few times now,
the British media is so like loads of the major gender critical people are British journalists.
Yeah.
And from right to left, their little like ecosystem. This is where it's grown up, and because they were all already friends and in the same group, and then we got this conservative government which kind of enabled them. It meant that they've created the ideology here. They've got the resources, they've written the blogs, they've written the news articles. So when you search up some kind of transphobic bullshit, if you're like, oh, I want evidence that trans kids shouldn't get trans healthcare, you're not going to get it from the science. You're not going to get it from any country that's just neutrally reporting on it. You need to go somewhere where we've created this almost like cult ideology, belief system, where there's absolutely no critical thought being applied to any of this at all. It's all just gender critical, people just churning out articles repeating each other and creating their little memes. And so that means if you speak English, the only anti-trans sources you get are literally from England.
I was about to say, yeah,
is
that the main reason? Like, I was going to ask you to go into a bit more depth if you know why Britain is the place where this fucking bacillus has developed, this cancer has become just so entrenched,
There's a few things. I think the British media is really a major force in it, just because, we don't have any trans journalists, really. The Guardian had a few, and they all were forced out of their job because of safety issues and complaints and stuff.
The actual cancel culture.
Yeah, the actual cancel culture. And no one knows their names or anything. And all of the Guardian journalists, like Suzanne Moore, who quit because someone asked her to not be transphobic, is now, still writing and still touring around, and everyone knows her name. But I think, that is a major part of it. I think another part of it is because gender critical now is just a conservative movement. But the reason why people say TERF is because some of its roots, at least its strategy, like the strategy of the gender critical movement is presenting anti-feminist arguments inside a feminist-looking language in order to get them past like liberals' critical thinking, limited critical thinking abilities. And so that came from radical feminism and TERFism, which is like a thing from the 70s. And what seems to be a cure from that is like there's another name for this brand of feminism is white feminism. And it's where it's very focused on, say, the major issue here is women's issues. So if you have any other issues, then keep them outside, because what we're dealing with here is women's issues. So when black women turn up and say, racism is as big a factor in my life as sexism is, they're like, okay, well, we're not talking about race here. We're just talking about women's issues. And if you say, well, I'm a lesbian, so, sexuality affects my life, they're like, we're not talking about your issues. And so it ends up creating just a subset where it's just straight white women who are middle class because they don't want to deal with any other issues.
Yeah.
And in the UK, because of how homogenous we are, I think that in the USA, feminism has had to deal with race. It's had to face it head on much sooner. And black feminists have had much more of a voice, which has meant that white feminism as like a block hasn't established itself so much. And then when your opposition is so much more religious in the USA, basically feminists either get funneled towards intersexual feminism, or they are not feminists and then they're conservatives. Whereas in the UK, we've got this kind of white feminist block in the middle, which sucks in people from both sides. Yeah. And I think that's a major factor of it too.
And it's probably going to get worse, at least in the media landscape as well, because is Eddie Izzard a familiar figure to Canadians and Americans, Lance?
Yes.
Yeah. I think they're gender fluid, I think is the official thing, but they go by she, her pronouns. And a comedian, famous British person. And they're going to be running in Sheffield Central, which is Sheffield is a city in northern England, for the Labour Party. They're going to be running for Parliament whenever the next election is. And they are obviously openly a trans person, and the transphobes have been going rabid about this. Literally, Posy Parker is Posy Parker, or Kelly Jane Keane is her actual name, a well-known British awful TERF who literally said that straight men with guns should go into women's bathrooms to protect them from the transes. She's crazy. She's apparently going to be running against Eddie Izzard, who is that's going to be an absolute media shitstorm. It's going to be genuinely one of the most hateful campaigns of memeing and transphobic hatred. It's going to be cancerous.
It's already, it already is. So, like, we had Labour MP Rosie Duffield spoke at 2 different hate rallies in the last week, at the LGBT Alliance conference and the Philia conference, and said at both of them, or maybe just one of them, I'm not sure, but I think both of them, was like, if Eddie Izzard, if I get arrested for calling Eddie Izzard a man, then arrest me now. And, like, was also saying, when Eddie Izzard gets put on a all-women's shortlist, then I'm going to quit the Labour Party and stuff. And then Eddie Izzard replied saying, like, wrote an official letter, I've never been on an all-women's shortlist, I've never been offered that. I'm not even sure if the Labour Party has all-women's shortlist anymore.
No,
it doesn't matter.
But and also Eddie Izzard said, I've never even requested to be on an all-women's shortlist, and said themselves that they wouldn't have wanted to be, because they knew it would cause this problem. Regardless of the fact that they should be allowed to, they knew it would cause this problem, and they didn't want it to be a big thing. They just want to be a politician.
But because the British media all reported on this thing, it's like a big deal, and now it's a meme, and like, oh, Rosie Duffield standing up to the evil Eddie Izzard and her.
How does she still have the Labour whip, by the way? She should be kicked out of the fucking party.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, she's just right wing. She doesn't even live in her constituency. She lives in like North Wales, and she's obviously just a garbage politician. Even if, she had 2 LGBT staffers who were, I think, 2 cis women who were either bisexual or lesbian, quit because of abuse in her constituency and all kinds of stuff, working for her. So she's obviously rubbish. But the thing is, Keir Starmer's obviously trying not to culture war. Like, he's just trying to not say anything.
Well, he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind purging progressive members of his party.
Oh yeah,
doesn't mind that at all.
He's happy to. Yeah, he is definitely happy to get rid of left-wing people.
But
he's not happy.
He got rid of Sam Tarry for daring to stand on a picket line. So, the party of Labour apparently are against strikers. Brilliant.
Against Labour.
Yeah, fantastic. So
yeah,
no wonder we're not feeling very optimistic as leftists in the UK.
That's kind of the general consensus I've gotten in the course of this past hour, is that things aren't great. They don't look like they're going to be getting better. And
when Liz Truss got in, I was like, oh,
who was that again?
She's garbage.
That name sounds familiar, but I can't picture her. Who was she? Who was that?
3 or 4 prime ministers ago, last week. Yeah. When she got in, I was like, oh, this is kind of garbage, but we probably only have to last like 18 months or something before it ends up getting a general election. But now she's been switched around so soon, the Tories are going to try and fake unity and build up for dragging out as long as they can. And I thought, oh, well, we've only got to make it to 2024, but haven't really got to make it to 2025 before the next election.
It could be in, was it January of 2025? But I think it'll probably be.
I'll be dead by then.
Well, hopefully we all will be. Yeah, that'd be probably the best case scenario for all of the people of this shithole.
Apart from Scotland, no one's going to get this reference, but there's this kids' cartoon called Super Ted from like the 80s.
Oh yes,
the bad guy was. Yeah, do you remember that? And he built this machine which was just a giant pair of scissors, and it drove around the border of Texas and cut out along the edge and then blasted Texas off so it was its own planet. So once Scotland has done that, then you can destroy the rest of the
that's one of the advantages of global warming. With the sea levels rising, it'll just be, Scotland will be a tropical paradise just above the water. England will be underneath, it'll be fine.
Well, like Scotland and England were physically separate at one point. Like, we're different blocks of land that smashed into each other hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Scotland used to be part of what is now Canada or something?
Yeah. So that's why you can see, I guess, on the border, like, the whole landscape. It goes from flat to loads of hills and shit. But
I didn't know that.
It also means, I think, that England is very, very slowly sinking while Scotland is rising. It's kind of going like a tilt. So I think it's just such a good metaphor for what's actually happening on the ground as well.
It's like it's geological William Wallace shit. It's lovely. I like it.
Well, everyone, I wanted to end on a positive note. So I wanted to know if all 3 of you would play a game with me. And it's a very simple game. I was going to give each of you a quote. And then I was going to see if you could determine whether this quote comes from Boris Johnson or Chef Boyardee. And here's my thing. I asked that all 3 of you do not cheat, do not use the internet. You don't have to hold your hands up. I'll have it on your honor. But just it's probably best if you could figure this out on your own. So again,
could you
this is gonna
summarize
be a
who the
little
other
game.
person is?
Chef Boyardee. That's all you really need to know. I think it's also a branding of a popular foodstuffs in America. So I'll start with you, LonerBox. This is the question for you. All right. So let me put on some tension music here. So here's the quote. You have to determine if this was said by Boris Johnson or Chef Boyardee. If you're ready, the quote is, "I'm down with the ethnics. I'm down with the ethnics."
I think that was. Is that? I don't think I've seen that on the Boris list. Chef Boyardee.
Unfortunately, that one was Boris Johnson.
Oh,
Boris Johnson said
God.
that in 2008. That was.
God, I really hope they don't
Johnson.
chop the fucking "I'm down" the "I'm" bit from the beginning of that sentence. Took that one out of context.
Yeah.
All right, Katy, to you, the same question. Is this Boris Johnson or Chef Boyardee? Here we go. The quote is, "Orientals have larger brains and higher IQ scores. Blacks are at the other pole." Once again, Orientals have larger brains and higher IQ scores. Blacks are at the other pole. Is that Boris Johnson or Chef Boyardee?
I'm just going to say Boris because I just think he's that bad.
Congratulations, you are correct. That is from an article published in The Spectator in 2008 when he was also the editor. Yes. Yes, that was 100% correct. Okay, and the final question now goes to you, Kevin Logan. Are you ready? You have to determine if this was Boris Johnson or Chef Boyardee.
Let's go.
Despite looking a bit like Dobby the house elf, he is ruthless and manipulative. Despite looking a bit like Dobby the house elf, he is ruthless and manipulative.
That has got to be Boris Johnson referring to Michael Gove. It has to be.
You are correct on the first part. It is Boris Johnson, but he's talking about Vladimir Putin.
Oh no! Okay, well that also works. Yeah, true.
Yes. And trick question: Chef Boyardee was not a real person. So
That's what I didn't know.
Well, I'm not entirely convinced, but I don't think Boris Johnson's a real person either. He's just a bad dream.
They're about as real as each other.
Yeah. Everybody, I can't thank you enough. This was a ton of fun. You taught me a lot about England. Everyone now is, I think, richer for having learned it. Hopefully a little less depressed.
Aren't you glad that you also get to live under His Royal Britannic Majesty as well now?
I am never going to forget it. Not only do we have a Governor General, we have the King of England as our highest authority. Yes.
Makes a lot of sense. Just lives 5,000 miles away. It's all good. Yeah.
You can get a lot of good quotes out of him too.
True. True. That ethnics thing.
Apparently, he talks to plants. I've heard that.
Yeah.
And, loves.
Did you see when
like
Liz Truss turned up to meet him again? He was like, "Oh, not again."
Yeah.
On camera.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm just glad our first ethnic minority prime minister turned up, and it wasn't Prince Philip there, because I don't know how racist that would have been if he'd still been around for that.
You do know how racist that would have been.
Well, no, it could have gone like nuclear with it.
You know.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like in front of the cameras, yeah, it could have been pretty spicy, I think.
Why don't we start with the one Scottish person on the panel, LonerBox? Do you want to plug all your stuff? Tell people where to find you, where your YouTube channel's at, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm a LonerBox on YouTube and Twitch. So say hello.
Katy.
I am Katy Montgomerie I have my own website now, katymontgomerie.com. I'm also I'm coming back to YouTube, so I've just started doing more videos, so come check me out on YouTube. Come to my Twitter. If you want to talk more about trans issues, which I've rambled at quite a lot for this show, I have a call-in show called the Transatlantic Call-In Show, where you can call in every week, Thursdays at 8 p.m. UK time, and ask any question you want. Bring an argument. Come tell me that trans people are the devil or something, and we'll have a discussion. And also, if you want to hear me argue about religion, I'm on Talk Heathen, which is a ACA show, also on YouTube. Check it out.
And before I let Kevin Logan do a ramble, I have to issue an immediate correction because Chad has blown me up. Apparently, Ettore Biodardi was a chef, and that is where the Chef Boyardee comes from. So there's a real Chef Boyardee known as Ettore Biodardi.
Was it Maria Rend in chat? Because they've just popped up in my chat with the same link, and if it is, they are An absolutely
Someone doing the
incorrigible
DM?
bastard.
I think multiple people were googling simultaneously. So I'm ready to issue a correction. I apologize.
No, never admit any wrong. Have you learned nothing from the internet? Double down. Chef Boyardee is he's fake news. Fuck him. Sorry.
And speaking of which, take it away, Kevin.
Yes, I'm Kevin Logan. You can find me at KFLogan1875 on Twitch. Katy, follow me back on Twitter. Just putting that out there. I'm also Kevin Logan 1875 on Twitter, and yeah, you can follow me on YouTube and all the various sites. Yeah.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining me and teaching me so much.
Thank you. Peace out.
Take care, guys.